Good afternoon, and welcome, folks, to our GVI Workshop Series, the last one of 2023. Hope that you are enjoying a little bit of the winter jazz music going on. We just wanted to get the mood right a little bit, just get the vibes right going on as folks came in to the GVI workshop, the last one for December. I am Dr. Talib Hudson. I'm not Michael Akinfora. You are used to saying Michael. He is uh, out right now, but we'll be back with us shortly. Um, and so it's a pleasure for all of you to be with us. So this is the last GVI workshop series session of 2023. Hopefully, all of you have enjoyed the sessions that we have had so far to date, and we will definitely get into that for today's session. Uh, Before we do that, let's go ahead and slide into some breakout rooms, and just get everyone to just get to know each other a little bit more, and just a question for folks to ponder amongst each other is just what have you learned so far in 2023? What are you taking from this year into next year? Just to kind of reflect and look back. It doesn't have to be too serious of a question, but just something to think about and reflect on. So Michael, my colleague Michael G, if you decide us in the breakout rooms, and as you get into your breakout rooms, just introduce yourself to each other and reflect on what we've all gone over and what we've learned from the past year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move over into more of our presentation portion of today's session. And just make sure everyone can see my slides. Yeah. Right.
Yes.
So thank you. So workshop series, year in review, just a quick overview of National Network Safe Communities for anyone who doesn't already know that we are an action research center based out of John Jay College of Criminal Justice here in New York City. And we work to implement proven strategic interventions. And our mission is to reduce violence, build trust, and transform public safety in partnership with communities around the world. This workshop series, which hopefully you've had the benefit of attending over the past year, is meant for folks who are new partners to our work and to the group violence intervention work in general, or maybe folks who haven't been around in a while. Maybe they had done GVI at some point in time, and it's been a while, and they want to get reacclimated, or folks who are maybe newer staff. Right? Maybe your city has been doing GVI for a while, and again, it's just a place for folks to come and to learn. Completely free workshop series that's open to anyone who really wants to be a part of it, and bring positive vibes and value and energy. And so it's a place for us to learn and discuss about GVI and about the broader violence prevention field, and see what's going on, and how we can share and connect with each other, hear from not only just our staff, but also hear from other partners in the field, people who are actually doing the work, and who can provide the value and the benefit of their experience. So now we're going to just go over a bit of a review of what we learned over the past year. What did we go over? Now, some of you may have been coming to some of these workshop series. Maybe you've come to one, maybe you've come to another. Maybe this is your first time, so I wanted to share the link with you. But one thing you wanted to make sure that you knew that these sessions are part of an overall larger framework, right? These weren't just individualized random sessions. They were all part of an overall plan that is designed to increase your learning and your awareness and your connections about the work. And so we first started off with the introduction. And we just want to talk about what is GVI? What is the group violence intervention? Because we've seen that oftentimes this work can get misconstrued, misidentified, um, or or somehow otherwise, the misapplications and misconceptions. So first, we want to talk about what is GVI, right? What is group violence intervention? It's a strategic, uh, comprehensive violence prevention intervention that is built off focused deterrent, that brings together strategic law enforcement, community and law voice members, and support and outreach folks to work together collaboratively to address shootings and homicides amongst a very small number of people who are responsible for the most greatest amount of violence. And just in case anyone hasn't already seen any of those previous sessions, the good news is we've got them all recorded. They are on our website, and I believe the link will be dropped in the chat in a second if it's not already there. You can go ahead and check out any one of the previous sessions. And even if there was a session that you liked, you said, well, let me go back and learn more about that. You can go ahead and do that. So that's what we started off with. What is GVI in the first place? And then we wanted to talk about, well, how do we focus on the right people? And the main takeaway from there was who are the right people? Well, the right people is really the smallest number of individuals who are connected to the most amount of violence. One of the things that we have seen in city after city, place after place, is that it's really a small amount of people, usually less than 1% of people who are networked with each other to various degrees, who are connected to the largest percentages and amount of serious violence in any given city or county or state. And so we want to make sure that we're doing in this work with making sure that the partnership between law enforcement, community law voice, and support and outreach folks are really focusing their attention on those small number of people, right? Not whole neighborhoods or whole housing developments or just things like stop and frisk, right? We want to make sure that our resources are focused. That's why it's called focused deterrence. And then from there, we wanted to look at direct communication. And once we have the people that we are most directly focusing on and make sure we have the right people, how do we directly communicate with the folks? And we talked about there are two main communication vehicles that we use within the GVI framework. One is a custom notification, which is as it sounds, a customized notification to people who are most engaged in violence. One of the legal exposure that they have, the legal risk that they are involved in terms of if they are engaging in serious violence or folks that they associate with are engaged in serious violence, the legal exposure that they're facing, and the harm that they are at risk of as well, but also to provide them with support, love, services, things that they may need either for their immediate survival and day-to-day needs, or whether it's more of a longer term, comprehensive healing, but to make sure folks have that. And then the calling, which is a way to directly communicate with the group. Again, they talk about networked groups of people, and we use groups in that gang, that groups of people to connect with them and directly communicate with uh, multiple groups in the same place at the same time and deliver the message that we want everyone to be safe, alive, and free. Here's legal exposure. Here's also support and services. And then after we talked about direct communication, we talked about support and outreach. We wanted to make sure that support and outreach is swift, certain, and sufficient, right? We want to make sure that we're not just offering people jobs and GED classes if that's not what somebody needs, if that's not where they are in terms of their personal development, and if that's not going to be the thing that's going to help them engage in behavior that is not rooted in the serious amount of violence, right? So we want to make sure that when we say swift, certain, and sufficient, that whatever support is promised, that it's fast, right? That people don't have to wait for it. That it's certain that people can rely on it, and that it's sufficient, right? That it meets the needs of where people are from where they are to where they need to get to. And from there, we talked about community moral voices, right? And these are the folks who are the moral authority and can provide influence within the GVI partnership, right? Whether that is helping to hold law enforcement accountable to make sure that their practices are legitimate and fair, and to also to make a hold support and outreach partners accountable to make sure that the work that they're doing is meeting the needs of the people most engaged in serious violence as well. And we talked about how there's a range of different roles that folks can get in where they fit in as part of the community moral voice. And of course, the traditional role of community moral voice being people at the call-ins who are representing those who have lost loved ones to violence, those who have, been in the life and have experienced incarceration, and and have seen a life improvement, and want to tell others how to do the same, and those who can inspire folks to achieve something more. But of course, the law enforcement aspect is central to the strategy, and so we talked about law enforcement to make sure that the law enforcement component of the GVI strategy is swift, certain, and fair. So swift meaning fast, right? So that there is as an immediate response to serious violence as is practicable, to make sure that it's certain, right? So that people know, right, that if there's a certain action, that there's going to be a reaction, right? That if a particular group is engaged in uh, uh, shooting and homicide, that there's going to be they can take it to the bank that there's going to be a reaction. And it's going to be something that's fast, but it's also going to be something that is fair, right? It's going to be something that is fair, not just in the eyes of some of the quote unquote average everyday community members, but one that even folks in the groups themselves be like, no, yeah, that was a fair response to what was going on, because we want everyone to be safe, alive, and free. And we know that uh, uh, when legitimacy and trust in institutions and in law enforcement in particular goes down, then there's associated increases, correlated increases in violence, right? So we want to make sure that trust and legitimacy is higher, in which we would hope that that would help to overall reduce violence, serious violence, and homicide. And of course, you got to talk about the project manager. We had a whole session on the role of the project manager of GVI, that three-legged stool, as I mentioned before: support and outreach, community moral voice, strategic law enforcement. You got those three legs of the stool. That project manager is the seat, right? That project manager is the one that is holding it all together, that is moving between the partners, doing shuttle diplomacy between different folks, and making sure that the implementation is being implemented and administered with fidelity. In the most recent session that we had just in November, we talked about intimate partner violence and intimate partner violence intervention, which increasingly more so we want to stress that even though the group violence intervention and the intimate partner violence intervention are separate um, interventions in terms of how they were developed, they're not mutually exclusive and distinct in terms of the goals and in terms of the population that interventions deal with. So in the intimate partner violence intervention, it seeks to directly address the harmful behavior, right? That so it takes the focus off of the victim survivor and say, well, how do we get this person out of the situation? And it puts it onto the person who is committing harm and saying, how do we get this person to stop committing harm, right? Well, let's apply, right, these same things that I just went through GVI, right? We want to make sure that we have swift, certain, and fair law enforcement. We want to make sure that we have swift, certain, and sufficient support and outreach. We want to have community moral voices, right? So not exactly in the same way. And you can go back and watch the presentation on that to get more detail about the intimate partner violence intervention. But it's to say is that these same principles can be applied to different violence issues. And what we've seen over and over again is that many of the folks who are involved in group violence are also involved in intimate partner violence and vice versa, right? And so we as we move forward in our work and our thinking, one thing that we've learned is, hey, these aren't these two mutually exclusive, distinct areas, that there's actually a lot of overlap. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that the intimate partner violence intervention was part of this workshop series. So as you can see, in case you didn't know or didn't recognize before, all of these sessions built upon each other and were part of a larger overall focus and strategy, folks to learn about group violence intervention. And again, some of you hopefully have gone to each session and you've learned some things. Some of you, this just may be the first time that you're coming and you're like, what is this thing? I'm learning about this for the first time. And so here, as you can see, is the whole layout of the sessions that we've had for 2023. And there is a link in the chat. And our folks, if you could drop that again for anyone who's just joined us recently, where folks can go back and catch the videos of the previous sessions. And again, that website that has all the GVI workshop sessions has not only the recorded session itself, it also has the slides from those sessions as well. So you can go back, get caught up, review anytime that you'd like to learn more about all of these pieces. And so now here we are in December of 2023. We do have another session coming up in January. We may go to February, we may push to February depending on how schedules work out. So always things are always interesting with when the new year comes around. But one thing we'll talk about in the new year is how to sustain the book. How do we put all these things together? But before we do that, we wanted to get some feedback from you. We wanted to take some time to reflect. Um, but let me just show you for this session, what we'll do, and we're recording this session, and this will be up on the website as well, is we just, picked out some highlights. Shout out to my colleague, Michael Gessler, who does phenomenal work here. And so what we've done is we've picked out some of the highlights. So from session one, there's a video here. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but just right around the 1 minute, let's see, 8 minute mark. Hopefully you can hear the sound as well if this plays. Okay, hold on. Let me see if we can get this sound going. Hold on, let's see here. All right, looks like I'm not able to share both video and sound at the same time because for some reason, even though we have been in this Zoom life for quite some time, I have not figured it out. So, so you can go back and watch those sections um, from the GVI Workshop Series, including the one introduction with our Director of Strategy, Sasha Cotton, who used to run the Minneapolis Office of Violence Prevention, what she was talking about. Um, Talks about the three-legged stool and her work there. Um, uh, our colleague Alexis Acevedo talked about focusing on the right people. And so he did a presentation on the small number of people. Direct communication. My colleague Paul Smith, talked about the costumes and the call-ins and the importance of the messaging. Isaac Hunt from South Bend, Indiana, talked about support and outreach and the amazing work that they're doing out there. And again, these are video clips that you can go back and watch. You can either go back and watch the whole session, or once this session gets posted, you can watch some of the clips as well. We talked about community moral voices, right? Making sure, putting forward that voice of a moral authority. And my colleague Isabel Rojas, was dropping jewels in this wonderful clip here. And we also talked about law enforcement as well, and the importance of police legitimacy and making sure that part is swift, certain, and fair. Project management, of course, what we focused on next, and then rounding it out with intimate partner violence intervention as well. And as you can see, some of the same principles here apply from GVI over to IMPD. So now that we've gone through all of that, we want to open it up a bit for discussion. I don't want to be, talking at folks all, the whole thing. We want this to be a little more interactive. So that's the presentation part of today's session. But the next part of this workshop for remaining time is really a conversation. It's really a discussion with all the folks here. Looks like we've got nearly 30 people on, and so we invite all of you to jump in. And so we've got some questions for folks to think about. One is, what have you learned from the workshop series? What have you found most surprising so far from those of you who come to multiple sessions? Maybe something that you didn't think that you would know. What did you expect to learn about, but maybe wasn't covered? They say, "Oh, I thought we were going to talk about such and such, and I've heard about such and such, but we didn't. We never really got to that." And what topics should we cover in the future? We're trying to figure out whether or not we should do this series again in 2024. But of course, you don't want to just do the same thing. We want to build on it. So what are things that folks want to know? And then of course, what questions remain for you? So I'm going to stop the screen share, and so that we can have a little bit more of an intimate feeling space here. And so I want to put the question out there. Please feel free to let me just do a quick temperature. Oh, let's see. Megan Scott, raise your hand before Megan. If we could just do a quick uh temperature check. If you can hear me, if you're listening, just put up some kind of Zoom emoji reaction. It could be a clap, it could be a thumbs up, it could be a heart. I just want to see our folks here. Are you with me? Am I by myself? I just want to see. Okay. Now notice, this is a group exercise. So other people will see who's putting up emojis and who's not. So if nobody puts up emojis, everyone's gonna say, "Oh no." But if other people put up emojis, people just put them up. So just want to see who's kind of in the room and who's around. Okay, just want to make sure that folks are still with us. Great. Thank you for that. So let's go. Oh, I see a hand up from Megan Scott. So Megan, once I kick it over to you, if you could just maybe just introduce yourself, and then if you want to reply to any of the questions that are here, or maybe you have a different question or comment. So Megan.
Sure, thank you. Hi, my name is Megan. I'm the Assistant Project Manager for Miami-Dade County's Anti-Violence Initiatives, which includes the GVI program. I am addressing the last question, which is a topic I would like to see covered in future workshops, which would be how to work with the media, specifically how to find reporters to build relationships, how to go about establishing those relationships, and how to ensure that GVI and your site is being covered accurately and fairly in a way that really showcases the amazing work that is being done.
Wow, thank you for that. That's an amazing suggestion. And I know that at one point in time, some years ago, I think we had a document that actually addressed that, dealing with the media, but I'm not sure we've actually refreshed that or gone back to that in some time. And especially now, where social media can, dominate more over traditional media sometimes. So that's actually a really great question. So thank you for asking that. Does anyone have any immediate thoughts or responses to Megan's question? It's actually a really great question. If anyone has any immediate thoughts or responses, please feel free to hop in.
I can hop in really quick. So one thing that when Deb came down, one thing that she always she said, build those relationships even with the media. So before, like with us, we actually have a media person on our governance committee. So we actually train them. You have to be trained in what we do. You have to see what we do, and before you can do a report on it, because you don't want to be with the yellow tape and then they say GVI, you implement the GVI strategy every time something happens if it don't pertain to group violence intervention. So one thing that I would suggest is that just build those relationships, invite them to do a training with them, and have them learn about the work that you're doing before you let them actually cover a story. Build those same positive relationships that we build with everybody else.
Thank you, Lisa. That's actually really very insightful. And I think the a point to lift out from there, from what you just shared is something, that is to make sure that we remember is, have the relationship be a real relationship and not transactional, right? So just like you were saying, Lisa, even if your relationship with law enforcement, the relationship with community leaders, the moral voice folks, relationship with support and outreach providers, relationship with people who are involved in groups and group violence, right? If you're only going to someone when you need something from them, then that's not a real relationship. That becomes transactional, um people are less likely to be wanting to help you out, right? Because then it's a you, or to me, it's not we. So thank you, Lisa. That's actually extremely insightful. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I put the questions that I asked in the chat here so folks can review them and take a look. Again, what have you learned from the workshop series so far? What have you found most surprising? What, if anything, did you expect to learn but wasn't covered? What topics do you want us to cover in the future? And then whatever other questions remain. That could be about GVI, it could be about the workshop series, it could be about folks deterrence in general. Um, so yeah, any questions, comments, reflections on looking back on this workshop series so far?
Good afternoon. Good evening, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Emmanuel Docdale, aka Kenny Glover. I just want to say to one of the women I was speaking with earlier when we was in the group, she answered my question. She said something about how GVI started, and it triggered all the notes that I have on Boston. So I had the answer, just didn't know I had the answer. Thank you so much. But one of my other questions I watched all the series from 1 to 8, and is a gentleman by the name of, I think his name is Isaac Hunt from Gary, Indiana.
South Bend. South. He also does work in Gary as well, but yeah.
I was in Gary, and I had participated with some of the ministers out in Gary, and I wanted to know how is it possible I can connect them to the GVI in Gary.
That is a really great question. I think there are some folks on our NNSC team who may be closer to the work going on in Indiana. Kenny, if you want to just maybe drop your email, you can either drop it to me on a DM, direct message, or put it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. And we'll make sure that someone follows up with you. I know there's been I think there's been some fluctuation in personnel in some of the implementations, and I think Gary and South Bend over the years. So I don't want to speak from incomplete knowledge as to what's going on there right now. But I know Isaac Hunt is definitely a phenomenal person, just to work with over the years, and I think they've got some a range of folks in there as well. I'm also interested in when you say the history of GVI, I'm interested to know what your thoughts or perception or your understanding of the history is, because I do think that's a very important aspect of this work to know, to understand, to reflect on when we're doing it. So if you don't mind just speaking to that a little bit.
Yes. Well, when I wrote my notes down, it was the original ceasefire in 1987 to 1990 in Boston, the homicide rate. And I remember that incident when everyone thought that it was someone of African descent tried to hold the people up and take their vehicle, when it was the husband that was the perpetrator all along. I think I was about 15, 16 years old back then. And that was quite interesting how that uprooted GVI. From that incident, GVI came into existence. So, just through watching that session and listening to all the other series, it was quite phenomenal. And it gave me a greater insight on the poverty that was going on in Boston, because I didn't know anything about Boston at 15, 16 years old, and things that were going on, and how it separated the group from the gangs and the gangs from the group, and started looking at them as two separate entities, but not the same entity, where what's the statement, all groups are not gangs and all gangs are not groups. So it allowed me now to look at things differently. Whereas I remember hanging out and it just was a group of us, but we weren't a gang. We just was hanging out, on the corner or in front of the stoop, having a good time, and then later on, you had that part of that group that separated from us and they became a gang. So, they want to rep the block or whatever they want to do, but that wasn't what we wanted to do. So we were separate from the gang part of the group, and we still maintain our group. So just from session 1 and 2, I gained a lot of insight on GVI and the purpose of group violence intervention and the importance thereof, and people coming into the community to speak to the youth, or speak to those who are struggling, who are in trauma, in crisis, and didn't know it. Because there's a lot of my partners at that time who some are with us and some are not, who were in crisis and needed something like GVI, needed somewhere to go, needed a program to go to. Fortunately for me, it was Court Employment Project, so they got me straight. And, I didn't have to go through some of the things that some of my people went through. But, that's my insight with GVI thus far. The importance that, when I go out there and do customs, how it touches me. I went and did some customs today, and it, when I read some of the charges, I was like, man, you going in there knocking on these doors by yourself, but I was comfortable. It wasn't sure. I knocked on plenty of doors and didn't know before I worked for GVI, but now I'm doing it and I have a purpose now, and it feels good. So, GVI is a great thing to be a part of. Thank you.
No, thank you for sharing. What city are you in?
Huh?
What city are you in?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in Albany, New York.
Albany, New York. Okay, great. Shout out to New York.
Thank
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Really appreciate that. For a couple of different reasons. One is so some of the history that you mentioned is what we covered in session 1. So if anyone missed our first session, link is in the chat. Please go back and take a look. One of the things that we did is we talked about the history of GVI, and we talked about this documentary that talked about the history of GVI, and talked about, to what Kenny was mentioning, that in Boston in the late 80s, as in many cities across the country, there have been increases in violence. A lot of it was associated with the crack epidemic of the time. There was a white male named Charles Stewart, who had accused a unknown Black person of murdering his wife, Carol Stewart. So Charles Stewart had called 911 and said that he had been shot and his wife had been shot. He didn't know who it was, but it was some Black guy. And Carol Stewart at the time, as she was known, I believe her family had her name changed back posthumously, was pregnant at the time, and so the Boston political structure, elected officials, the law enforcement structure, had a full mandate to essentially terrorize the Black community in Boston to try to find who this mystery assailant was. When in the end, it was really Charles Stewart himself who had shot and killed his wife, and had shot himself. And so what the situation had exposed was not only was there, yes, a lot, high rates of violence in predominantly Black communities and communities of color, but it also exposed the racism and the illegitimacy of some of the law enforcement tactics and practices that were used. And so there was a combined effort between law enforcement partners, community leaders who were seeking to stop the violence in their community, and at the time, a young researcher named David Kennedy, and other academic partners who to come together and say, how do we try to address not only the serious violence that is in the community, but also do it in a way that that relies on practices that are more fair, and just and legitimate. And that was the what became known as the Boston Gun Project, which then became known as Ceasefire, and the elements of which now drive the work that we now call GVI, the Group Violence Intervention. And one of the reasons why it's so important to know that history, and one of the reasons why we actually showed that full documentary in that first session, the link of which is in, if you go on the workshop series page and you go to that first session, we have the link there. You can go watch that 30-minute documentary. One of the reasons why it's so important to understand that history is because oftentimes when we talk about the GVI work, and sometimes folks are terms more generally, it gets framed as a law enforcement specific strategy, as opposed to being a strategy that brings partners together, of which law enforcement is a partner, but law enforcement is not the only partner, right? The goal is not to go arrest a bunch of people. The goal is to say, hey, how do we do things differently than we were doing before, right? So when we're doing the whole point of having the focused part of the deterrence when you're doing your call and your customs and you're focusing on the small number of people is because that is a distinct difference to the practices of the time, like stop and frisk and busting in people's doors and, running up to, if there's a housing development, running in the whole entire housing development and lining people up against the wall, right? Something I saw growing up myself, in New York City, right? So one of the whole points of GVI is to say, how do we do things differently, right? How do we not do the same thing? If we do the same thing, we're going to get the same result. So in your implementations, one of the reasons why we wanted to have the workshop series in and of itself is to also spark that idea that, hey, how do we do things differently? So if you're still doing the same things that you were doing 5 or 10 years ago, are you really doing GVI, right? You know what I mean? Because you're gonna get the same result, but you got to do it different, right? How do you spin it? How do you innovate? How do you iterate on it? And so thank you, Kenny, for that, for bringing up that point and that historical point, because it's really important to understand the foundational philosophy behind GVI in order to really implement it with fidelity, not just to the model, but with fidelity to the philosophy, right? Fidelity to the philosophy. And if you're just talking about locking up people, then you're not doing GVI. You call it GVI, you call it whatever you want, but it's not GVI. And then the second point is that many folks in their contract.
Brother Talib?
Yes, sir.
Yes, just so you know, I'm using Kenny Glover's computer. My name is Emmanuel Dr. L.
Emmanuel Doctor. Oh, okay. Sorry, I saw Kenny Glover twice,
It's
and
all
I was
right.
like, oh, okay. Emmanuel Doctor L. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank
Yes,
you for
sir.
the clarification. Um, and thank you to Kenny as well for the technology. Many of your GVI contracts that you have, there is funding for what's called a peer exchange. And so because you had mentioned wanting to connect with people in Indiana, and so if you are in contract, that's something that you would want to talk to your GVI advisor about. If you are not in contract, as many folks, right, the point of this workshop series is for folks who are new to the work, are curious about the work, and are not in a contract with NNSC. But if you say, hey, I want to learn more about that, I want to go, I heard about the city, can we visit them? Reach out to us. Our email is available. Again, if you go to the workshop series link, there's contact info, all of that. Please feel free to reach out on any more specific questions that you may have. So thank you for that point. Um, Other thoughts. We know anything that you've learned from the series so far, anything that you found surprising, anything that you expected that we would cover and we just didn't. Things you want to see, what if we did this and should we do this again? And if we did, what should we do? Or any other questions that remain at all about GVI, this process, the history of GVI, NNSC, anything. Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, I found it really interesting how you all covered intimate partner violence and its overlap with GVI. I was wondering if there are other types of crimes that you think would also be relevant to include discussions on that may have an overlap as well.
Sure. So I'll do a brief touch, and if I can cue up my colleague, Rachel Teicher, because Rachel is not only well versed in IPBI specifically, but also has led some of our international work as well. But just briefly speaking, the focus deterrence strategy broadly of looking at taking what seems like an intractable problem that can be solved, trying to unpack the details of it. How do you identify the small number of people who might be involved with the largest amount of the problem that you're trying to address? And then what strategic sanctions can be applied to deter that behavior, and what support can be applied to incentivize positive behavior, right? And how do we have community moral leadership involved so that community norms are set and it's not institutions, right? If we take those basic principles, it can be applied to a range of different public safety problems. And so one thing that we've worked on over the years is drug markets, intimate partner violence, of course, prison violence. You looked at larceny at one point. So it's been applied in many different ways. But Rachel, let me pass it to you, given your vast experience, not only with intimate partner violence, but also you've seen this applied in different countries and different slices folks deterrence in many different ways.
Yeah, thanks, Talib, and thank you, I think, Megan, for the question. I don't have too much more to add to what Talib has said that won't take us down a real long path. And I'm always here for that, so certainly feel free to ping me or reach out to me. But I think to Talib's point, depending on what the problem is, if you have the right people, particularly if you have representation from the people that are at the front lines of working with the issue, being impacted by the issue, thinking about and caring about the issue, and you can understand some fundamentals about what is happening. Do you know who or what is driving the violence, the crime that you are looking at? Do we understand what face-to-face communication could look like? Do we know what it would mean to set something up where we are offering, genuine, authentic support and outreach, offering help, but at the same time acknowledging what connections continued behavior might have to risks, right? Personal risks, legal risks. Then I think that this is something that we could apply to a whole bunch of different serious public safety issues. When it comes to, and I see my colleague Cass has her hand up, so I'm going to make sure we can get to her in a second. I think understanding what the problem is, which sometimes seems very straightforward, but can be a bit more complicated than we even realize, helps us narrow into what is it that we're trying to do. Right? So if we want to set up something because we want to stop all intimate partner violence, we're going to be pushing a really big rock up a really big hill, right? Because we're not saying we can eradicate any and all violence, right? So what is it we're looking to do? Are we looking to reduce it? Are we looking to pause it? Are we looking to improve the experience for victim survivors? Are we looking for ways to prevent rearrests and reincarceration? Right. So I think some of it is what is the issue? Some of it is what are our goals? And then I often think that when you have the right people, we've been really successful in helping them think about a way to apply the type of thinking, the types of structures you've learned about in this workshop series to whatever that problem is. And I happy to talk more and in more specifics if that's something that interests you. But I want to make sure Cassandra gets a chance, because Cassandra actually is the project manager leading the work in one of our longest running intimate partner violence sites.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm trying to lower my hand so it's not hanging out there. I wanted to say that I've really appreciated the knowledge that this group has shared throughout the course of these. I think it would be great if they did continue, if not for any other reason too, just to network and keep these conversations going amongst the professionals like us that are doing this work and sharing common trends and themes and things that we're seeing, to just brainstorm with one another. And, you know, I definitely want to continue to explore with all of you the intersectionalities of the group violence intervention, as well as the intimate partner violence intervention, due to the significant amount of overlap. So I do hope you guys do decide to continue them, because they have been really, really valuable, and I've taken away a lot of things. So thank you.
And thank you for that feedback. Really appreciate that. Sometimes you do something you don't know, right? If what folks are thinking. So thank you for that feedback. And I know we're always looking at ways to try to connect folks virtually. But since 2020, right? And everyone's lives on Zoom now in different ways. So I know we've had different workshops and we've got, if anyone isn't familiar with the support and outreach group, there's support and outreach for anyone who does and touches support and outreach on every Monday at 12 noon Eastern. I want to say, if I'm not mistaken, there's a support and outreach call for folks to gather information and share, commiserate, because the work is hard. Sometimes we want to save lives, but you can't save everybody, right? That's just the reality of the work, right? And whether that means you lose someone in terms of to homicide, or whether someone commits a violent act and has to be incarcerated, right? And and it's like, I was working with this person, or I did a custom, or they were at a calling. I really didn't want them to go to prison, but you know what I mean? Like that, that's just what it is. And then also working with the person and they're no longer here, right? So we've had various support and outreach groups, project managers, specific groups, and law enforcement groups. Nothing like that same magic, right, of the workshop series. So thank you for that feedback. I also want to point out, I would be very remiss if I didn't mention, in response to Megan's question, that we are also looking at how to apply focus deterrence to police misconduct and misbehavior. Through a project funded through Arnold Ventures, we are trying to see, can we take these same principles, right, that we just talked about, that has been effective in reducing violence within amongst groups, reducing violence amongst intimate partners, reducing drug markets. Can we use these same principles to address police misconduct and misbehavior? We believe we can, but we're working on that design right now. We had a roundtable discussion at ASC, the American Society of Criminology Conference in Philadelphia, last month, and chopped it up with some folks, and we talked about those ideas. So if that sounds interesting to anyone and you want to learn more about that, feel free to reach out to my colleague Heather Conley, who's on the call here. Feel free to just reach out, and she's leading that project, and we can, we'd love to hear folks' professional expertise and perspective. And thank you, Heather, for dropping your email in the chat. So, oh, Cassandra likes the idea. Okay, yeah, let's talk. Let's definitely talk. Let's please, yeah, because we're trying to see can this work. I mean, I don't want to get down a like Rachel, I don't want to get down a rabbit hole because we'll be a whole other thing. But yeah, it's definitely a topic that we are trying to unpack. I also want to give respect and honor to Christiana's comment. Hearing more about ways to incorporate GVI strategy to rural communities. And so yeah, so thank you for that comment because the history of it that it was born out of a very urban area, right? Boston, one of the major cities, and we usually implement the strategy in cities. But however, there are other especially when we talk about cross-jurisdictional locations, whether they're county-wide locations, where these principles can be applied because it's not about the geographic area per se, but it's about these same principles, the underlying principles, right? What is the harm that is being caused, right? Who is causing the harm, right? How do we identify the people who are directly connected with causing whatever that harm is, right? It doesn't matter if it's on the block, on a farm, in a suburb, in a field, right? It doesn't matter where it is, um, geographically speaking. And then what sanctions can be brought to bear to deter behavior, but also what supports and resources can be brought to bear to positively influence behavior as well. And how do we draw community members together? So in a rural area, it might not be the same as in like Miami-Dade. They have these walking one stops, right, which are very well known and go out to the community and go down the block and bring resources. Well, in a rural area, right, like your neighbor, might not be exactly walking, right? It might be down the road, right? Or it might be depending on how rural the area is. You know what I mean? It could be, like my mother's from North Carolina, right? And so in certain areas, it's just different than New York City, right? So you might not do a walking one stop in the same way. But are there different things that folks may need um uh in that particular community that could be effective for addressing those concerns. But also feel free. I'll drop my email in the chat here in case anyone needs it. And that's something we can also talk more deeply about, right? Because if you're already looking at applying these principles, um, how then do we now look at um do we look at if you're already doing the work, how do you make it shift for this, shifting it to just a different context, right? Especially if you've got an urban, suburban, rural nexus, right? Or maybe you've got like a central city, you've got some surrounding suburbs, and then you've got some rural area nearby, right? It could be the case that people are doing shootings in the city, they live in the suburbs, but then they're like running out to the rural areas, right? Where it's like it's less populated and they're hiding stuff, right? How do you build those connections and make sure that everyone, from a regional perspective, knows that it's everyone's problem? One of the sites that we look at very highly is New Haven, and even though they are a city as well, and just dealing with rural issues per se, their ability to bring together partners across jurisdictions, because it's not just New Haven. They've got a lot of different municipalities and local government in a small area. And they found a way to bring partners together across different townships, cities, and even on the state and federal level, because they see that the crime and the violence that they're experiencing, as people say, it doesn't stop at anybody's border, right? It doesn't stop at someone's geographic line, your precinct line, your township line, your county line, right? It doesn't work. And if that partnership isn't there and it's strong, what folks who are committing harm can do is take advantage of that lack of organization. They take advantage of that lack of partnership. And so we use these principles to bring partners together, again, not only for sanctions, not only for punitive actions, but also for supports and bringing community members together and for folks to see how our futures and our lives are interdependent and mutually connected, even if it doesn't seem that way first. So we're about an hour in, and we don't necessarily have to go the whole 90 minutes to 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central. But I still want to give opportunity for folks, if you've got any questions, concerns, things that you've been thinking about, things that this discussion has brought up for you. We want to make sure that we're being, as National Network 6 community, that this is a national network, right? And that we're being responsive to the need, to what all of you are seeing on a day-to-day basis, whether or not you're actually implementing GVI right now, or you really want to implement GVI, you came to these workshops to learn more about it, and maybe you're not getting the kind of buy-in that you were hoping to get from your local leadership, and you're trying to figure out how to take that next step. Whatever the case may be, whether you're experienced with GVI or new, we'd love to hear any other thoughts you may have about what you've learned so far, what you found the most surprising, what did you expect to learn that maybe we didn't cover, suggestions for topics to cover in the future, and literally any other questions that might remain, anything that you were afraid to ask before. I think now's the opportunity to ask those questions. All right, all right, all right. I once took a course in pedagogy on uh, teaching and reading in classroom, and a tip that they said is whenever you ask a question, let it sit for 7 seconds, because some people may be still getting their thoughts together. Some people may be afraid to ask and they're not sure. I know some people maybe they just need a second to hop in. So I'll give people a moment to hop in if they have any other questions. But if not, we don't necessarily need to belabor the point if it's not helpful. We can close out a little bit early. So before we do that, I want to give anybody a moment. Any burning questions or thoughts, comments that you want to add before we close? Or anything from the NNSC team? Anything that we should have covered that we didn't cover, or that we want to communicate as we close out 2023? All right, all right, all right. Well, if anyone does have any questions, as soon as we close the Zoom, you're like, oh my goodness, I meant to ask such and such, or oh, that was a really good point, I wanted to follow up on that. Or I had this question I wanted to ask, but I did not want to ask it on the Zoom full of people. Not a problem. You can reach out to us for more information. Here we have the email for the GVI Workshop Series. If you have other questions about topics that you want to see in 2024. I think what we've heard is that folks like the workshop series for the most part, and would like to see more topics covered. So we can definitely work on that. Actually, let me just see if you're still listening and you happen to be near your computer or device. I know some people may have stepped away, but if you happen to be near your computer, if you want to see GVI Workshop Series continue in 2024, can you just maybe drop a heart emoji? And if you can't find a heart emoji, you could drop another emoji. I just want to get a sense to see what people are thinking. You don't have to say anything. Just give an emoji so we have a sense of how folks are feeling. Okay, okay, light it up, light it up. Okay, all right, okay, cool. So now I can go back to my people and say, listen, that they want more. That they want more. So we can work on that. We'll get to working on what on the next set of workshops. But don't forget that in January, and it may start in February, so just stay close to your email. We'll look at sustaining the work, especially now that we've heard some of these questions that folks have asked. We can think about that and maybe incorporate some of that. How do we sustain? So let's say, okay, I've done all the things, right? I know about GVI and what it is. We've got we're looking at the right people. We've got our direct communication going on. right? We got our support and outreach together, our community moral voice, our strategic law enforcement, right? We got our project manager set and we're doing super dope things. Oh, and we're looking at intimate partner violence as part of it. We're doing our direct communications with our customers and our call-ins and all of that, right? We're doing all the things. How does it not fall apart, right? How do we keep this going? How do we sustain it, right? How do we make this more than just a one-time thing? Um, Very deep question. And so that's what we're going to be covering in our first workshop in the new year. And then hopefully many more topics to come after that. So we'll see. So we'll see. Well, all right. Well, if there's nothing else that anyone wants to add to the conversation, listen, thank you so much, everyone, for coming to these workshops. This couldn't happen without all of you in your attendance. There is no workshop series without workshop attendees. It's just us hanging out on Zoom, playing with PowerPoint. So we really do appreciate all of you for your consistency and your ability and willingness to participate, which is a huge thing in this Zoom life that we live in, whether it's Zoom or it's Teams or it's Google Meet or it's Skype or it's, whatever it is, right? Whatever virtual interface that you're using, sometimes it's hard to find that connection with people. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, alluded to, this whole endeavor is about relationships and about connection. If the work doesn't work, if you don't have relationships and connection. So thank all of you for showing up and doing all that you have done to make this what we call a success. So thank you so much. And also, I also want to give a special shout out to the folks at NNSC, National Network Safe Communities, who are, doing incredible work over this entire year. I mean, first of all, Michael Akampora, who has been holding it down and doing amazing, incredible work leading this series for this entire year so far. Want to give a huge shout out. Megan McDonald, who, helped put this whole thing together from the jump. Super shout out to her. Michael Getzler, who is somebody you may not see much, but you feel his presence because he does so much behind the scenes, back end work. He put these video clips together. He makes sure things get up on every time someone says, are we gonna get the slides? Michael makes sure you get the slides. Man, Mike will make sure it's looking good and looking right, and it's on the website for you. So thank you, Michael G, for all that you do in this workshop series, and everybody else on the team. Audrey Hatch doing amazing work, leaning in Rachel Teicher, who I can't even speak enough about the work that she does not only in IPVI but across the world. Really, Heather Conley, that's who I call my favorite nerd here at NNSC and who is really pushing our thinking and leading that work on the focus determined work. I see Nick Lumos, GVI advisor, coming always asking us questions and pointing out things that we could do. Alex Acevedo, if you've ever had a problem analysis, you felt the work of Alex Acevedo. He's our guy on that. And he just does such amazing work as well. Fatima Zara, who was on earlier but had to hop off, also does such amazing work not only in front of the camera but also behind the scenes across the board, across so many of the different interventions that we do, and it just helps our staff stay sane in this in this world that we live in. Anyway, so if I start trying to name everybody, I'm going to forget somebody, and I'm going to hear about it, and that I don't want anyone to feel left out. But I do want to just make sure that as we close out for 2023, just give a huge thanks and appreciation to everyone, because again, it's teamwork that makes the dream work. And none of this work works without all of you. And at the end, at the bottom of this, of what we're doing, again, just to recenter and reorient ourselves, if we do it right, people are going to live. If we do it, we do right. If we do it well, if we do it halfway decent, people are going to live that might not otherwise have lived. Kids are going to grow up that might not otherwise have grown up, or their parents are going to be there, or people are not going to be in prison that might otherwise have been in prison. right? Like if we do what we do well, if we do what we do, and we do it to the way that we know it can be done, if we do it with the right spirit and the right heart, right? And the like my colleague Paul Smith said, if we do it with our hearts in the work and smarts in the work, then people are gonna have lives change. And that's no small feat. So thank you everyone for a wonderful workshop series so far in 2023. We will see you in 2024, sustaining the work. Excited to hear about that. Please feel free to continue to send us your thoughts and ideas for future workshops, and we will catch you in the new year. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.